Welcome to our Community Views program. I'm Jill Miranda Baker, the Executive Director. We miss seeing everybody, but we are appreciative for your engagement with us through this virtual platform. We are happy to share that the museum opened this past week with controlled capacity and safety features in place. We have modified our virtual schedule since reopening. You can find the full slate of our program offerings and registration links at keysdiscovery.com virtual programs. Typically, our programs are offered to our members for free as a benefit of their membership, and non-members pay a fee to participate. During the pandemic, we have offered our lectures and other new evening programs like this to all free of charge. If you are not a member and in a position to do so, please consider making a donation through our website, keysdiscovery.com/support. Every small and medium and large donation is greatly appreciated and supports the continuation of lectures and all of the new virtual programming that is helping us share our mission both here in our community and across the virtual world. Or better yet, become a Keys History and Discovery Center member, which will allow you to continue free participation in future and virtual programs and in person. Annual memberships start at just $65, and you can join today at keysdiscovery.com/membership. Now for some go-to webinar housekeeping items. You should all see the go-to webinar viewer, which contains both the presentation slides and the webcam view. If you are on a computer, this is to the left of your screen. If you are viewing on an iPhone, you will need to swipe left and right to switch between the presentation and the presenter. On your computer, click the control panel. On your computer, the control panel is located to the right. If your control panel collapses, the orange arrow allows you to expand again. Oh, I got ahead of myself. On a tablet or phone, the control features are at the top or top and bottom. The questions panel is another important function, which this slide shows you how to locate. Let's do a quick practice with this feature. I am sending you a question right now. Please reply with the number of people, including yourself, watching from your device this evening. Questions will be taken differently than during our lecture presentations. If you have a question that is specific to a photo that is being shown, please type that question into the questions panel, and I will do my best to read those to Brad as they come in. If you have a more general question, we ask that you hold those until the question and answer segment at the end. During this segment, we will also use the raise your hand feature, which will allow you to speak your question. We will review this feature at the start of the Q&A segment. If you experience a decrease in bandwidth during the program, you can choose to watch just the webcam view or just the slide presentation view. Audio continues with either screen. Tonight, we are pleased to have the Discovery Center's own Brad Bertelli presenting. He joined Keys History and Discovery Center upon its inception in 2013. He earned a master's degree of fine arts in creative writing from the University of Miami in 2001. Upon moving to the Keys, he quickly embraced the unique and expansive history of the Upper Keys. He is a published author of 4 books about the Keys, plus 2 on the Netflix TV series Bloodline. Brad, welcome.
Hi, thanks everybody for tuning in. Today we need to switch out of this and onto my presentation.
I'm working.
All right, I'll chit chat while you do that. So we're going to talk about Rock Harbor, kind of a forgotten area of Key Largo today. Here we are. Nope, there we went. You had it for, all right, hold on.
Is it there?
Let me hit my little button there. All right, I think we're good to go. So we're going to talk about Rock Harbor, which is kind of a forgotten area of Key Largo. And this is largely going to be a talk about, not largely, but a lot of post offices will come into play because the Rock Harbor kind of came and went through postal records and other phenomenon that we will talk about. It's really a cool subject. I trying to do this exhibit or to do this presentation. It got really long, and I tried to narrow it down. So hopefully I'll be able to squeeze everything in, and we'll find out how it goes. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. Now, so this is going to be a lot about post offices and pineapples. The first post office on Key Largo was actually really early in the Florida Keys history. In 1870, the first post office for Cayo Largo, which was an early name for Key Largo, was established in 1870. Serviced reported 17 families. There were about 60 people living on Key Largo at the time. And that post office was pretty short-lived. It began June 14th, 1870, and then closed October 10th, 1871. Now,
hey Brad, it's
yes?
Erin. Can you put your PowerPoint into slideshow mode for us so it fills up our screen?
So this the picture on the right there is an early picture of one of the Rock Harbor post offices, and that's probably that's in the 1920s for sure. And we'll get back to that picture in a little bit. But the first postmaster and one of the first real residents that we know of the Rock Harbor area was this gentleman here named Captain Ben Baker. And Ben Baker was a wrecking captain out of Key West in 1850. He was recorded in the U.S. Census as being 32 years old, a mariner living in Key West. And sometime in the late 1850s, he decided that pineapple farming would be a great second job, and he went to Cuba and collected thousands of pineapple slips and suckers, little baby pineapple plants that start to grow out of a pineapple, and sailed them aboard his ship, the Rapid, his wrecking schooner, the Rapid, up to Key Largo, and where he and his family had cleared some land, and so he becomes really one of the first commercial pineapple farmers in the Florida Keys. And he also was Key Largo's first postmaster, as he is the one who opened up Post Office Cayo Largo. And his plantation was about mile marker 98, which is really right in the heart of the area that was recognized as Rock Harbor. Now, this is a picture, a sketch of his pineapple farm on Key Largo. He had a secondary plantation on Plantation Key as well, and this was done probably between 1860 and 1861. There was a man named Dr. J.B. Holder who took a boat ride around the Keys basically from the Miami area to Fort Myers, and did a lot of sketches and a lot of writing, and published his piece in a piece called Along the Florida Reef as a serial in Harper's Weekly, which is Harper's Bazaar today. Now, pineapples really became one of the primary cash crops in the Florida Keys, and the industry took a big hit for several reasons. Two of them being hurricanes and Henry Flagler. In early 1900s, there were a series of hurricanes that kind of diminished the pineapple industry. They talk about a pineapple blight, probably as a result of storm surge continually washing over the islands. There were hurricanes in 1906, 1909, 1910, and this probably would have salted, well, it did salt the earth. And even today, after a hurricane and that storm surge washes over the islands, everything dies. You know, the grass is dead, everything kind of dies. And also one of the problems was Henry Flagler, who opened his railroad. His destination was Key West, but his real destination was Havana. So the railroad would go to Key West. At Key West, the railroad cars would be loaded onto a ferry. The ferry would take it to Havana, and in Havana, those railroad cars would be filled with many staples and things coming up from Cuba, and one of those things was pineapples. And Flagler charged a lower fee, a lower tax rate to the Cuban pineapples than they did to the local pineapples grown here in the Florida Keys. And that, between that and the hurricanes, really kind of set the pineapple industry kind of on its back. But pineapples were not the only crop being grown in the Florida Keys. This is a picture of grapefruit. This is after the 1906 hurricane, and these guys, as well as several others, were out collecting grapefruit that had been blown off the trees. And the account states that there are 5,000 or 6,000 of these or more grapefruits that they harvested. In addition to grapefruits, tomatoes were a big industry, and also our friend the key lime, Citrus aurantiifolia or aurantiifolia, which is the key lime, which was not the key lime at that time. In those days, this would have just been called the lime or a lime. And where the pineapple kind of faltered after the hurricanes, the key lime trees weren't as affected by the blight, and they really flourished here in the Florida Keys. Now, this is a packing house on Rock Harbor where they are packing limes, and you can see those bushels. And when they would harvest these key limes, they would sort them into size: large, medium, small, and some would garner a higher price than others. Some are more desirable.
Brad, we have a question specific to what you're talking about from Bruce. How did he get ownership of the land for his pineapple farm? Was that government land? Also, how did he become the postmaster? Who appointed him?
All right. This was all Key Largo. I'll just say stick to Key Largo was government land prior to 1872. And these guys were all the people who lived on these lands were really just squatters. Eventually, they would homestead these properties under the Homestead Act that came out through Lincoln. And in order to homestead a property, you had to clear it, you had to improve it, build a house, and then live on it for 5 years. But that wasn't a possibility until the land was surveyed. And Key Largo wasn't surveyed until 1872. So there are no homestead records that predate 1872. So the short answer is they were all squatters at first, who then kind of were grandfathered into the Homestead Act, and they would declare their property. As far as how he became postmaster, he sent a proposition, a letter to the U.S. government, asking for permission to establish a post office. And in this case, he said he would be delivering mail to 17 families, about 60 people. And then he was assigned he was signed by the government, was signed that degree, or that position, I guess is the better way to say it. Now, the Alburys, Beauregard Albury and his family were early settlers in the Key Largo area. They, like many of the families, originated from the Bahamas, who moved from the Bahamas to Key West, and then from Key West they began to come up to the Upper Keys. They would have arrived in 1886, and Beauregard, who you see pictured there with his wife Mamie, was 3 weeks old when he first arrived in Key Largo. And they moved about mile marker 98. Many of the stories and the pictures and the people we'll talk about all lived basically between mile marker 97 and mile marker 100, with a few exceptions. But the Albury family, they were farmers and fishermen. And I'm going to read you a quote about William Dunham, who is Beauregard's father, and he during construction of Henry Flagler's railroad, they would fish and fish and then supply the railroad company with fish for the cruise. Now, in Beauregard's words, we used to fish a lot too. I caught from 1,200 to 1,500 pounds per day on a hand line, sold them for 5 cents a pound to the railroad. They would furnish the ice and pay the freight. We packed the fish in burlap bags with ice for each railroad camp and marked the sack with the camp number. This was during the building of the railroad. We spent 8 years fishing every day except Sunday. They would buy any kind of fish except stingrays and sharks. I caught a jewfish weighing up to 300 pounds. So they were making pretty good money fishing every day and supplying the railroad with this protein for the railroad workers. Oh, well, I forgot I had that slide in there. So this is what I just read. So we'll go across that. Now, around 1911, Beauregard and his father William built this house that you see pictured about around 1911, 1912. The Bahamian style house. It is still located where it was originally built, around mile marker 98. It is the oldest house on Key Largo that still sits in the area where it was originally constructed. And what's kind of unique about this house is, you know, mosquitoes were a horrific part of everyday living in the Florida Keys, which is why most of the people early on would build their houses on the water's edge facing the Atlantic Ocean, so those ocean breezes would be able to kind of blow in and help act both as a form of air conditioning, because these houses would have large windows, but also as a rudimentary form of pest control. But what's kind of cool about this house is it was one of the early houses where screens were put in the windows to help combat these mosquitoes. Now, this is a picture of the house today, which is known. It's in the median of the highway, and it's now home to Reef, the Reef Environmental Education Foundation. And what you'll see with those 2 blue arrows are the cisterns that were built along with the house. Fresh water was always a concern, and houses were built with cisterns to help supply their everyday needs for fresh water. And here there are two cisterns. There's a round one with that's been reconstructed. Jerry Wilkinson and the Historical Preservation Society of the Upper Keys, they funded the reconstruction of this cistern. And then behind it, there is a more traditional square cistern. And this is kind of an old picture from an old book that shows the 2 cisterns as they were originally. And the square cistern in the back too also has its cover on it. But what the 2 arrows are pointing at are the gutters. The roofs in those days were always tilted. I don't know why I can't remember that word. And you can see where the top blue arrow is pointing to a gutter that is going to the round cistern, and then in the lower arrow is showing 2 of the gutters that are catching all this rainfall that's coming out and delivering it to that smaller square cistern. Now I'm going to go back real quick. One of the cool features that when Aaron and I were doing our field trip Friday several weeks ago, we visited this structure and talked about this house. And one of the things we didn't get to cover was on the side on the left there is a mosquito pond. And a mosquito pond is another early form of pest control that the early pioneers would use. They would create these ponds next to their homes and filled with mosquito fish, these tiny little fish that would feed on mosquitoes. So the mosquitoes, they reproduce in fresh water, which is why they're so horrendous after it rains. But they deposit their eggs into the fresh water. The eggs develop and become these things called wrigglers. And the wrigglers are what these mosquito fish would eat. So they would feast on the wrigglers before they could hatch and become mosquitoes. And there is an active mosquito pond next to the house there, which I wish we would have talked about when we were there, but we didn't do that. So we are going to move on. Now, I
Had
showed this
Brad,
picture.
Quick
Yes.
question. A question from Ellen, were they having to clean the fish prior to selling them to the railroad?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think they were just packing them in ice, and then once they were delivered, then the camp cook would fillet them down and cook them however they're making stews and other things that they're going to do. They would have used much more than just the fillets. They would have used the cheeks and the heads and getting all much bang for your buck as you possibly could. But their job was to catch and to pack, and then they would be shipped just the fish placed into burlap bags, covered with ice down, and then delivered to the work camps. And there were 80 work camps. So and each camp would have a cook, and that person would be in charge of preparing and serving the fish. Now I used this slide during the Tavernier presentation of community views because it was labeled in my files as the Tavernier School. But then as I was doing research for this presentation, I came upon someone talking, P.L. Wilson, who I believe worked for the railroad, I'm not positive, but was also a key lime farmer, lived in the Rock Harbor area. He had two key lime groves, plantations that he was working. But as they were talking about Rock Harbor in that area, they were talking about the teacher Elise Warren and this one room school. And we know that the teacher here is Elise Warren, and that would make sense that there wouldn't be two Elise Warrens, one in Tavernier and one in Rock Harbor. So this is not a Tavernier picture, but actually a Rock Harbor school picture. And these are one room wooden buildings, no air conditioning, no mosquito control, pretty miserable conditions by today's standards. In those days, you wouldn't know any different because that's just how life was. Now this is the Rock Harbor Grammar School, built around 1924. And we talked about Beauregard Albury a couple slides back, who built the oldest, he and his father built the house that's now home to Reef. And in addition to being a fisherman, they were also farmers and had key lime groves. Well, they donated Rock Harbor needed a new school, and Beauregard Albury donated some of his land for construction on a new grammar school. And this is the two-room Coral Rock Grammar School. And you can still see this building stands, in a manner of speaking, still about mile marker 97 point something in the median of the overseas highway. But what's interesting about this school is that it is the sister school to the Matecumbe Grammar School, or actually the Matecumbe School would be a sister school to the Rock Harbor School. The Matecumbe School was built after the Rock Harbor School. And the Matecumbe version, which is identical, would have been on the grounds of what is today the Chica Lodge. Today they have still, the Pioneer Cemetery is still there, but next to the cemetery was also the Matecumbe Methodist Church, and then the the Matecumbe Grammar School. Unlike the Rock Harbor School, the Matecumbe Grammar School was destroyed in the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. Now, the building, this is again a close-up of the Rock Harbor School, former Rock Harbor School. It closed down around 1939. It operated from 1924 to 1939. And then in 1940, it became the Methodist Church, Reverend Getman Memorial Methodist Church. I'm not sure how long it operated as that, but this particular building has seen many incarnations, including custom cabinets and boat repair. And today it is home to the Key Largo Moose Lodge. You can still see, and this is this image faces the northbound lane of the overseas highway. And as you drive past it, you can still see the coral rock, the bones of the building that was once the grammar school. Now we're going to talk about the Bethels. This is a picture of it's James Bunyan Bethel and Lilian Ma Lily Bethel, and then their kids Letha, Bertha, and Malden. They would have 3 more children: Elizabeth, Emma, and Freeman. They would have 2 other children that would die early on, and they would live in this house around mile marker 98. The Bethels had come from Cherokee Sound and Abaco in the Bahamas. They moved initially from the Bahamas to Key West. About 1896, they moved to the Planter area. Planter was a small community in the southern part of Key Largo, in the area of what's today Harry Harris Park. That was a planting community that was developed in the late 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, called Planter because it was a farming community, and they grew lots of pineapples, cucumbers, tomatoes, melons. And Planter kind of went on the wayside, partly due to this series of hurricanes that I talked about in 1906, 1909, 1910, but also the arrival of the railroad, and the people who were currently living on the ocean in the Planter area began to move closer to the more convenient location of the railroad tracks, and that area would become known as Tavernier. About 1910 was when when the last of the people from Planter had moved to the Tavernier area, and 1910 is about when the Bethels moved to Rock Harbor. Now this house, I believe, was kind of on the bay side, across from where the ambulance building is today. And I was talking to Lester Curry, who is the son of John Curry, who would marry one of the Bethel daughters, and said that the 2 children that died early on were buried back in that area and then lost track of, through progress and hurricanes. But also the family cistern is still back there in the woods somewhere. Now, before I go further, we're going to go from the kind of the Bethels into the Curry family. And the 2 daughters, Bertha and Elizabeth, would marry 2 of the Curry sons, Cyril and John Curry. Now this is a really cool image. It's I believe it's from Rock Harbor, but it shows an early Monroe County school bus. And I put that slide in there because we talked about John Curry, and John Curry would become one of the Rock Harbor school bus driver. And this is a copy of the letter that was provided by Lester Curry, John's son, to us here at the Keys History and Discovery Center. And this was dated January 18th, 1933, addressed to John Curry, Rock Harbor, Florida. And it says, in part, the information has come to us that in the event of the resignation of the bus driver who was furnishing the Tavernier Rock Harbor transportation, you would undertake all of the transportation of Rock Harbor school children. And this letter kind of gives him permission to, when the other driver resigns or quit, that he would immediately be taking over. And we have here a picture of John Curry with several children on his Monroe County school bus up in Rock Harbor. Now we're going to talk, this is kind of when we really get into the Rock Harbor postal history. And we showed this, the photo on the left there, the Rock Harbor Post Office. I'm not sure where it was located, but we have the picture on the right is Lilian Pinder, who was the postmaster around 1924. And I know that she's standing in front of that building because that doorway is the exact doorway that those 2 kids are standing behind as well in the image. Now, most of the postmasters in the Rock Harbor and Key Largo area were ladies, were women. I know they refer to them as postmistresses, in the documentation, but postmaster, it's one job, I don't think it matters what your gender is. Now, this is the Garrett Observation Tower, which is a really cool old building. And this was located again around mile marker 98. It would have been in what is today, I believe, the median between the overseas highway, the northbound and southbound. His wife, it was built by George Garrett, and his wife Milesy Garrett became the postmaster from 1929 to 1936. He was the deputy sheriff, and of this area. And as I was again doing some research, I found an article from August 7th, from August 7th, from 1933, and Deputy Garrett had a problem with one of the local families and contacted the sheriff down in Key West, and it was a short article in the newspaper, really more of an announcement, that read, "A family on the Keys made a threat against Garrett, and the situation has grown tense. Garrett called the sheriff to personally look into the matter," and the August 7th account stated that either the day before or the following day, that the sheriff would be traveling up to Key Largo in Rock Harbor to deal with the family at hand. I didn't get to find out what the problem was, but this was kind of a roadside. But the building itself was a roadside attraction in 1933, Rock Harbor, Key Largo, and I'm going to show you another roadside attraction in a couple slides. But this is, kind of one of the early roadside attractions here in the Florida Keys, in the Key Largo, Rock Harbor area. And there were hotel rooms in here. It's also home to the post office. And then across the street, there was the Tower Cafe, which offered, hot meals and Fall City Lager beer, also hotel rooms. And I'm going to jump ahead real quick. And this is like from the top of the tower. If you're looking north towards Key Largo, or towards, north, this is kind of the view that you would see. And before I go back to the previous slide, the Bethels, who I talked about, were also farmers, and they were growing key limes, tomatoes, and also mangoes. And mangoes will be an important part in just a second. Now this observation came from a WPA project where they're putting people back to work, and including artists and writers. And this comes from a book that was published by the government. And this was an observation of one of the writers who had traveled down to the Keys and reporting on what they had seen in the Keys. And this is his description of Rock Harbor in 1938, a tiny village with a 30-foot observation tower over its post office. The tower is a square stucco structure anchored by cables to the bedrock. From its railed upper platform is a view of the Atlantic, Florida Bay, and the Gulf. Eastward is the ocean shore, where there are racks for fish nets. All around the teeny settlement are extensive lime groves that bear most of the year. To the west is a mango grove. And so here we're looking, east would be the Atlantic, and then west from here would have been the Bethel's mango grove, which I keep wanting to say mangrove, but it is a mango grove.
Brad, Bruce Levy has a question. What was the purpose of the observation tower?
To get people to stop, because not only was this a post office, but also you could stop and get cold drinks and snacks and things. So, and it's a hotel, and you want people to stop over and spend money. So every roadside attraction has its ulterior motive, and that would have been this one's ulterior motive, was to make a buck. Now this is another place around mile marker 98. This is a postcard that was stamped in 1934, and this is a place called Mack's Place. And another road. It was a gas station, a place to find supplies for fishing, for bone fishing, to rent boats, things like that. But there are two really kind of cool signs I want to talk about. On the left, the small sign on the left with the arrow pointing up, that is advertising lime pie and home cooking. And again, and back in these days, lime pie was key lime pie, but it was not advertised as key lime pie. That the key lime part would not come until late 30s, early 40s, when the key lime, or when the lime becomes known as the key lime. But what's also interesting is this sign on the right-hand side, which is in true roadside attraction. It is a poem that I'm going to read to you. I took great pains to blow that picture up and using a magnifying glass to figure out what the words were. But what you'll notice behind that sign on the right there is an old clunker, an old car that looks in terrible, terrible shape. And the poem is about a flivver, F-L-I-V-V-E-R. And I did not know what a flivver was. And so I looked it up, and a flivver was an early 19th century word for a beat up old car that we would call today a Keys cruiser. Now, and this is, I'll read the poem now, which is pretty funny. A flivver with piston rings, 2 rear wheels, 1 front spring, has no fenders, seat or plank, burns lots of gas and hard to crank. Carburetor rusted, half through, engine missing, hitting on 2. 5 years old and in the spring, has shock absorbers and everything. Radiator busted, sure does leak. Differentials dry, you can hear it squeak. Wheels half busted, front all bent. Top it off, ain't worth a cent. Got lots of speed, runs like the deuce, burns lots of gas or tobacco juice. Tires all off, been running on the rim, but she's a darn good flivver for the shape she's in. And then the bottom of it says, see Mack for more if you have questions. I thought that was a fun little poem, something that would attract your attention to pull over and give you a reason to stop and then go into a store and spend some money. This is Mack's place from 1941. Again,
Brad?
It's a gas station. What?
One question from Bob Murray. Is the observation tower still there? Is it the building with the mural?
It is not. That
Oh,
building,
it is not.
the building with the mural, that is about 2 miles north of where the Garrett observation tower once stood. Now this is, again, Mack's place, and again, a place to get gas, to buy fishing supplies for fishing and rent boats. And I have the arrow pointing to kind of something that looks like nothing at the moment, but it's a tall, again, kind of an attractant. It's a big antenna tower, or a big antenna, and as you'll see, as it kind of zooms in closer, advertising Mack's. And this is kind of shows that this is, this is where you can get a restaurant to get some food, to buy supplies, and to stop. And there's the up in the lower left-hand corner, there's some fuel tank or gasoline pumps, not pumps in those days, but fuel.
Are there windmills in those photos?
Windmills?
Yes.
That is a windmill of sorts in this picture here. Kind of a fun one with buoys and and just things that would catch air and definitely would spin. So, and there's lots of signs and shells, and like there's piles of conch shells, and there's cutouts of pigs, and just kind of a place that you would stop and kind of wander through and get kind of a sense of. And there's another windmill right above the sign that says Mack's, that's next to the flivver poem on the right-hand side where that arrow is. That's another windmill there. So lots of and also next to the sign, advertising lime pie on the left-hand side. That's another windmill. So yes, lots of things to attract the attention of your passing driver, to get them to stop and get out of the car and look around, stretch your legs, get something cold to drink, maybe a bite to eat, and a souvenir or two from your time here in the Florida Keys. And a postcard like this one. Now we're going to go back to this is John Curry and his son James. Now this is John's place, about mile marker 100, kind of where the Shell station and office depot area is today on the ocean side. The house behind the car there was built after the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, and then early in 1936. John and his wife lived in this house until 1976. Lester Curry, who was John's son, said he lived in this house until 1966 when he enlisted in the service. But the 1935 Labor Day hurricane is interesting for another reason. Prior to 1935, there was a Rock Harbor. There was a Tavernier post office, a Rock Harbor post office, and then there was also a Key Largo post office closer to mile marker 105. And in those days, Rock Harbor would have been kind of between mile marker 92 and mile marker 100, 103, kind of that area. Now, after the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, the Key Largo post office closed down and was incorporated into the Rock Harbor post office. And from this point, from 1935, for the next almost 20 years, Rock Harbor was considered all of Key Largo, basically north of Tavernier. And again, we see the school bus behind John's head. Also interesting to note, well, I'll get that in a second. And this is a better picture of the Curry house built in late 1935, early 1936. You see the arrow on the right pointing to the Monroe County bus, which has been upgraded since 1932. And then the arrow to the left shows the new location for the Rock Harbor post office. And the post office, also a gas station. Now the family standing out in front, we have John and his wife Elizabeth Curry. Moving left to right, we have John and Elizabeth Curry, Elizabeth who was a Bethel, and then we have Floyd Curry, and then we have Cyril and Bertha. Bertha was also a Bethel, and then we have Norman Curry, who was their father. Norman and his wife had come from the Bahamas, from Cherokee Sound, the Abaco area, moved to Key West, and then moving up into the Rock Harbor area. Now, one of the interesting things that we talk about is how rocky the land is, and how difficult it is to have a farm or a plantation when there is so little topsoil. And Erin, in one of our talks several weeks ago, when we were talking about key limes and key lime groves, talked about how her grandparents would use a stick to kind of find a red hole or some kind of depression in the sand where you could plant a seed to grow a tree. And as I was doing research for this, I came across this earlier account which corroborates what Erin was saying. And this was written by Rodman Bethel, who was Norman and Ellen this was their nephew. He was from Key West. So he writes, I spent all my summer vacations with my Aunt Ellen and my Uncle Norman, who was a Florida Keys farmer and had 2 fields on Key Largo, and they lived on a place called Rock Harbor, which was so rocky that I can remember my uncle would use this point stick in between the rocks and would place a seed in the hole to grow a tomato vine and Florida key limes. I can remember him shipping limes and tomatoes to Baltimore by the carload. All right. Now here's kind of another picture of the Rock Harbor post office, which has since moved. Right behind where it says Rock Harbor post office now would be the Curry house built by John, who is standing there in the doorway. And if you look closely at that picture, you'll see that his left arm is half of it is missing. He was born with only half an arm on that side, and was still the school bus driver. And it's always amazes me because in the old days they used to refer to the overseas highway, some of the locals did, as Old Bumpy. And some would say that for every mile you drove north or south, you would travel about a half mile up and down, because it was not asphalt and smooth as it is today, even though even now it's not so smooth in some areas. But it was, really dirt and rock, and to shift gears, to steer, and then to also navigate that with one arm, I would imagine would have been a pretty impressive skill. But this is also John's place next door to what's now the post office, and I'll show you a kind of a better picture of this in a second. But where it's groceries and meat, and a kind of local Rock Harbor grocery store. And here's kind of a takeaway from that. And where the one is, that was the old location of the Rock Harbor post office. Now it is in this picture, it is just a Standard Oil gas station. We have picture 2, which was in the previous slide was the grocery store, is now John's place for lunch. And then under number 3, we have the Rock Harbor post office. And then the arrow pointing in the back, pointing towards where the John Curry's house was behind that. And here's another postcard kind of showing the same image. And that arrow pointing to a sign that reads homemade lime pie again. And I'm not sure what the date of this would be. I believe it'd be late 1930s, early 1940s. Now, when John Curry passed away, his son Lester Curry found his railroad ticket folded up in his wallet, and Lester Curry donated this really cool artifact, as well as the letter we showed you earlier that announces John Curry's position as the next Monroe County school bus driver for the Rock Harbor schools. But this is this is one of the cool artifacts that we've collected, and this will be incorporated into an exhibit that we'll be doing, a future exhibit that will be showcasing not only the some history of the Currys, but also some additional railroad passes that we have from the William J. Crome family. And he's the old time gentleman pictured there in the upper left-hand corner in both of those exhibits. And this exhibit will be coming sometime in the hopefully not too distant future. Now, all right, I'm gonna have to run through this next part. So now when it comes time for Rock Harbor and the history of how Rock Harbor loses its name as a postal, kind of as a community, and becomes Key Largo, all of this changes with that infamous movie called Key Largo, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, with Edward G. Robinson as the mafioso dude. And this all centers on the Caribbean Club, which was kind of the last endeavor of Carl Fisher, who was probably best known in this area for he was a land developer who developed Miami Beach. He was also had a big automobile history. He developed the Lincoln Highway, which was the first road to cross the entire U.S. He developed the Dixie Highway, which connected Miami to Michigan. He also built the Caribbean Club which became under construction in 1939. Carl Fisher would die shortly after the Caribbean Club opened up for business. And here's a picture of the Caribbean Club. Looks a little different than it does today. That top arrow shows the hotel annex that was included in the club, and it was a fishing club, a fishing camp in those days. You'll see the skiffs out in the water, and also the lower arrow pointing to what looks to me like a shuffleboard playground there, area. Another postcard from 1952, which is now being advertised as the nationally famous Caribbean Club because of the movie, the wildly successful movie Key Largo. Now this is truth in advertising because the Caribbean Club is literally the birthplace of the movie Key Largo. There is, lots of questions about, was it filmed in Key Largo? Was it not filmed? Was it filmed at Key Largo at the Caribbean Club? It was largely filmed on sound stages in California. There, in some accounts, there were some mood pictures or mood films, some filming done of the area. That's disputed by some people. But Bacall and Beauregard never came to Key Largo. They were never at this particular club. But these two gentlemen were at the Caribbean Club. And they arrived in the late 1930s. This is John Huston, the director, and Richard Brooks, the screenwriter. And when they arrived on Key Largo, John Huston had found, come across a play written by Wes Anderson. I believe it's Wes Anderson. And the play was called Key Largo. He liked the title of the play, but not the content, and had a different idea for what his vision of the movie Key Largo would be. So Richard Brooks was hired to rewrite the script, and Brooks and Huston both came to Key Largo and visited, and they found the Caribbean Club, which was closed for the season because in those days, during the summertime, summer months, things were closed down because there really was no reason, no visitors, no one was coming down. But they convinced the owner to open up to them, and no sooner had they opened up to Huston and Brooks and their wives that the card tables and other gambling slot machines and other games of chance appeared, because the Caribbean Club, known for a lot of things, was also a place where you could do some illegal gambling. But anyways, so the screenplay for the film Key Largo was actually written at the Caribbean Club, and the story is that both Huston and Brooks lost most of the money they had been paid to direct and write the film, and in the last day or so, they went back and were playing for and recouped some of their losses. There's another story that says as that last day, there was a hurricane that had been approaching, and they kind of left right before the hurricane came, which kind of goes kind of along with the film Key Largo. But post movie, it's wildly successful, and now this is a postcard. It's advertising the nationally famous Key Largo. The upper arrow is pointing towards a lot of stills from the movie and pictures of Beauregard and Lauren Bacall. And if you've not been inside the Caribbean Club, it looks nothing like that today. But it's really a kind of a cool little picture of how things used to look. Now this is the Caribbean Club today, and it's because of the Caribbean Club and the movie Key Largo that the name Rock Harbor kind of loses its steam and becomes something of the past. Before I get into this one real quick slide, what's really cool behind the Caribbean Club today, back by the Bayside, this image on the left where it says Key West 102, Jack's 420, that's an original Henry Flagler Oversea Railroad mile marker, and looks a little different than they do today. Every mile marker in those days marked two distances, one from that point to Key West, and then one from that point to Jacksonville. Now, there is an actual mile marker, the one on the right, located on Big Pine Key, which is a shell of its former self that is still standing on the side of the road. It's falling apart, and I'm not sure how much longer it'll be there, but there is one final, that is the very last mile marker to be found on the Florida Keys from their railroad days. But it's has lots of spalling and the concrete is falling off. It's on the ocean side near, I believe, the Salvation Army building there, about mile marker 30 area. But from Rock Harbor to Key Largo, sometime in the 40s, the post office was moved from the Curry compound just south to about mile marker 99.5 at what is today really the Napa Auto Parts area. And the problem was that people visiting Key Largo could not get a postcard stamp that said Key Largo on it. They could get a postcard that was stamped Rock Harbor, Florida, but no one knew Rock Harbor, Florida. Because of the movie and the wild success of the movie, everyone knew Key Largo. So members of the community passed around a petition to have the post office and the city renamed from Rock Harbor to Key Largo. And that happens on May 31st, 1952. The Rock Harbor post office closes for the first time. And on June 1st, 1952, the Key Largo post office opens up, and the Rock Harbor name kind of goes by the wayside. And today it is known, and the area is known as Key Largo. I know I have a few more, I actually have several more slides to go, but I'm going to stop here since it's already 6 o'clock to make sure we have time for questions. Jill, you want to?
Yes, I will share my screen.
There is still one sign that kind of designates the Rock Harbor area as you're going northbound on the Overseas Highway about mile marker 98. There is a road sign that says Rock Harbor on it. That's really the last of the Rock Harbor legacy, aside from a few of the businesses still that are still go by the name of Rock Harbor, and condominiums and other places. You know, one of the stories I wanted to get into was Harry Sontag, the hermit artist of Key Largo, who kind of arrived in the Florida Keys around late 1940s, early 1950s, and opened up. He opened up one of the very first art galleries in the Florida Keys around mile marker 99.5, kind of where Anthony's clothes store is today. He opened up in what was an old abandoned lime packing house, and his story is pretty interesting. And Chuck Faulkner, if you're on the line there, sorry I didn't get to that, but we will cover him in another program, because we could do a story about him, an entire story about him. It's a pretty interesting character.
All right, let's give this a shot. I will start with the question that we have received from Bruce Levy, who asked, was it a municipality with elections, mayor, etc.?
As far back as the 1800s, with voting, and so yes, so the I'm not sure when Key Largo got its first mayor, that sort of thing, but I'm not positive when, but elections date back in Monroe County to the 1800s. So there was always the sheriff was elected, your judges were elected. So there was that was going on as soon as Monroe County became a county in 1823, it comes to mind. So that I'm not sure when it was broken down into Key West. Well, Key West, their mayors and their stuff came up around in the early 1820s, but I'm not sure when Key Largo area, when that kind of filtered up to Key Largo. I'm not positive. That's something I can look into and get back to you.
All right, we have a question from Chuck Faulkner. Chuck, unmute yourself and we're ready for your question.
I can figure out how to do that.
You're
there
good,
you
Chuck.
go.
Okay, Yeah, I typed it in. I was told that Sontag's gallery was actually a key lime packing shack. Would it have been possible that it could have been a pineapple packing house instead?
Well, probably it was originally a pineapple packing house that was but that's how things started. And then, and grapefruit and key limes and tomatoes, and it was just a lot of whatever fruit was, depending on who owned that particular packing house.
Right, because from the photo, it's a pretty old building in the 1950s. So I'm thinking it's probably almost 80 to 100 years old at that point, maybe. So that would have been more in the pineapple time, right, or not?
It would not have gone back to the 1850s. It was probably 1880s, early 1900s kind of area.
So when did the pineapples actually stop being packed and sent out of there?
Between 1906, 1910, kind of that area.
Oh, okay. So it was earlier. Okay. So yeah. Okay.
But these packing houses would have been for and they would have rented out their space for other farmers who didn't have a packing house, for the smaller farmers. So it'd have been grapefruit, tomatoes, melons, cucumbers, onions.
It's amazing they could grow that much stuff on rock.
It is. Thanks,
Brad.
Jeff.
Thank you, Brad. Great show.
Thank you.
We have a question from Mary Jo Kisco. Before the latest Key Largo post office was built, was there one on the northbound side in Tavernier in one of the historic buildings across from the hospital?
There is the Tavernier post office. There is one that's still standing, built in 1926. It's a big white building just north of the hospital on the northbound side. That was the post office from 1926 until I'm not sure when. But there were several early post offices, and and that one, that post office I showed in the Tavernier presentation was right across the street from right across the old highway from the Tavernier Depot. Is that kind of what you're asking, Mary Jo?
And Mary Jo, the location of that today is a little further north than the hospital. It is right at the 92-mile marker where there's the flashing light today, just north of like the Sunrise Market in that area.
All right, it doesn't appear that we have any further questions. Couple quick notes before we sign off. The program has been recorded and we will load it onto our YouTube channel in a few days or so, and we will be sharing it to our Facebook page as well. At the conclusion of our program, you will be prompted to take a brief survey about your experience with tonight's presentation. We do value your feedback and would love for you to take a moment and complete the survey. It will also be sent in a follow-up email in case you'd like to complete it at a later time. And don't forget to tune in to our field trip this Friday with Brad via Facebook Live at 10 a.m. We'll be going to Plantation Key School to share a project we did in conjunction with their new construction. Thanks for joining us and have a great evening. We appreciate all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you.